Okay. So we will begin with the slide that we had left off the previous day, in the previous class, in the previous lecture. আমরা ওখান থেকেই শুরু করব so that we have a bit of a revision and there will be no confusion regarding today's class. So this was the slide that we had left off in the last class, and we were discussing about this term or this word called ideology, and we were discussing about how does a traditional Marxist think. And this is very important, as I had already mentioned. However, I will just revise with this. So in your screen you can see that ideology is written in brackets for the society and for literary practices. It means just that literary practices are a kind of ideology, or the society, not particularly society samaj ideology na, but social practices rather, how we behave or what constitutes or what runs a society, ওই ওয়ার্ডটাকেও ideology বলা যায়. Now I will give you a very short and simplified example. You are welcome to do one other thing. Since আমরা online classes করছি, we have such bigger windows of opportunities, and so many things are accessible to us in this scenario. So I am teaching this theory, not particularly this theory, but post colonialism বা colonialism বা British Raj যখন ইন্ডিয়াতে ছিল, রুল করছিল, in the Indian context of course, তখন there were certain theories that were developed. They were called colonialism or post colonialism. So, and I'm teaching this theory to PG students, and তাদেরকে I have given a very detailed lecture on this, how ideology is a literary practice, but how literary practices can also be called ideologies. So if you want, you can watch that recorded lecture as well. If anyone is interested, I will give you the link. Okay, people are still joining. So yes, so how are literary practices ideology? I will give you the example of one single text. Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling, all of us know Rudyard Kipling is the writer of the Jungle Book, but he has written several other novels as well. And you should know that Rudyard Kipling was born in India, and very much like George Orwell, jar essay Shooting an Elephant we have read. And Rudyard Kipling was also born in India, and he was he was a part of the imperial forces, but later on he went away to Europe. So being born in India, of course you can say that he had seen or he had participated within our Indian society, within our Indian culture. He has lived in India, so he knows the country to a certain extent according to his own perspective. Of course, he is a white European individual, so his own perspective matters a lot when it comes to our country. So, and he has written novels about India. Particularly, there is a novel called Kim. I am writing down the name of the novel in the chat box. Kim. So this is a novel that Rudyard Kipling has written about India. This novel is totally completely situated in India, and this is we have a European writing about an Indian boy living in India and making literature. So this novel was written in the early 20th century. Before that, in the 20th century, beginning of the 20th century, and we are still reading that piece of novel. আমরা এখনো 100 বছর পরে আমি এটা পড়াচ্ছি ছাত্রদেরকে, ছাত্রছাত্রীরা পড়ছে সেটা. So one thing is clear, is that literature always lives. Literature is like matter, it is indestructible. সাহিত্য কোনোদিন ধ্বংস করা যায় না, একবার তৈরি হয়ে গেলে থেকে যায়, এটা ব্রহ্মাণ্ডে ঘুরতে থাকে. It circulates around the universe and remains immortal with so many interpretations. It always changes. Literature is not constant, it always moves, changes, it's dynamic and it's eternal. So in this novel we find that Rudyard Kipling describes India the way he sees during the time when he was writing. So it was economically poor. People or Indians, they were yet to be completely westernized. এই যে আমরা আজকে যে প্যান্ট জামা পরি, and it's so normal, all of us do wear that, and irrespective of gender. So at that point of time, that was not the case. Western clothes were very much limited. Of course, Indians used to wear, but they were the elite classes. The elite classes ব্যাপারে আমি পড়িয়েছি. So they were the higher classes of the Indian society who used to wear these Nehru coats, then these Western pants and shirts and suits, boots, even caps and hats, etc., etc. So these are all Western clothes. But the mass of Indians, maximum of the Indian population, they used to wear traditional clothes. Traditional clothes, again, differing according to culture. So traditional clothes according to a different particular culture can be dhoti panjab, like for us Bengalis. Traditional clothes for another culture may be sari and the white lungi, যেরকম South Indians রা পরে. Traditional clothes can be patialas and Punjabis, like the Punjabis wear. They can be single robes, like the monks, like Buddhists wear, like Tibetan monks wear. So there can be so many different things. And the poorer Indians, if you remember, of course you will know that poorer Indians, they were not very much into traditional dressing as well. ধরো যারা গরিব হতো, so they used to just wear half dhotis. একটা গরিব ছেলে, a poor Indian boy, it was not very surprising to find a poor Indian boy wearing a half dhoti. I hope you can understand কি বোঝাতে চাইছি. একটা half dhoti আর খালি গায়ে ঘুরে বেড়াচ্ছে. আজকে এখনো দেখতে পারবে. You go out in the city and you will find so many boys just wearing half clothes, okay, and running around. So that is how we see, and that was how Kipling saw India at that point of time. But India today has changed. Yet Kipling's novel still remains, because it is conveyed via their language, that is the language of English, so important as the lingua franca. Everyone needs to know English. That is what the conception is. So this ancient or this outdated view of India, তোমরা যদি নমস্তে লন্ডন দেখে থাকো, there is a very of course a very controversial scene over there where Akshay Kumar defends India to a British individual. However controversial that may be, that was a very novel or new kind of filmmaking that we saw in that movie. And you will find that Akshay Kumar is saying over there that how much ever we progress, আমরা যতই developed হয়ে যাই না কেন, how much ever we develop ourselves, how much ever we polish ourselves, India for the West will always be a land of snake charmers, a land of myths, land of mystical stories, land of magic, land of religious charades, যেখানে ধর্মকে এত বড় করে we celebrate religion, land of superstitions. So India will always remain like this. How does it remain like this? এই যে remain থেকে যায় এরকম ভাবে কি করে? Even though you and I as educated individuals know that India has changed so much, even if not completely, but then again change is again subjective. পরিবর্তনটা খুব ব্যক্তিগত হয়. Change for you is not change for me. But talking in the general sense, we know that our country has developed a lot, it has grown a lot. Abar development ta kake bole, kar dik theke, so lots of questions. Nonetheless, I'm just putting a general statement. So even though India after 100 years has become independent, has become economically independent, sustainable, it has undergone so many regimental governments, it has undergone so many kinds and types of government, it has undergone wars and battles, so on and so forth. It is now a prominent and influential nation in the world scenario. Yet Kipling's India is still a land of charms and superstition. This practice of representing India or any other country for the matter, any other country যেটাকে ডমিনেট করা হয়েছে হিস্ট্রিতে, যেখানে কলোনিয়াল রুল থেকেছে, you talk about Africa, you can talk about Britain itself, you can talk about certain places in America, and India, of course. So this history that refuses to change, or rather very specifically these historical representations, these representations refuse to change precisely because these representations were made by the people in power at that point of time. And these people were not only power in India but all over the world. And English being their language, they circulated, they distributed this representation. And it is still there in the pedagogic circles. আমরা পড়াচ্ছি, তোমরা পড়ছো, আগামী দিনেও পড়ানো হবে। এটার কারণ আছে, of course there is a reason. We are not just pushovers, we are not just paying our respect to the colonizers. No, it's not that. There is a reason that we read these texts. Nonetheless, these representations, they bind us, they bind or they limit us to very certain degrees which the power at that point of time thought fit, thought appropriate, and thought accurate. Now, Kipling cannot come back from dead and say that India is no longer like this. He is dead. Whatever he has done is done with. But his book, his language, his written words, his literature remains, and that circulates. And it is these representations that make ideology, that make literary practices an ideology, because we can never come out of this vicious circle of representation. We can never come out of this rigid and frigid circle of set of representations that the world or the West keeps us closed in. And you will find a contemporary recent example. Take a recent example, Slumdog Millionaire, such a popular movie, such a famous movie. It won Oscars, but the maker of the film was a white man, and the film he was making on was on India, and he never showed all these developments either. So Kipling did it 100 years ago, and this person is doing it even now. So তুমি ভাববে যে আরে বইটা তো এত হিট হয়েছে, ইন্ডিয়াকে দেখিয়েছে হ্যান ত্যান। No, it's not that. Have a critical mind, judge it. Remember, and always remember that in that movie, all you ever saw was a boy from the slum living in India who is not thinking twice before jumping into a pool of shit in order to retrieve a photo of his favorite hero. That shows how much blind worshippers of heroes we are, and we do have it here. আমাদের এখানে বলিউড নিয়ে প্রচুর ফ্যানাটিসিজম আছে. You will get numerous examples. So in that movie, all it glorified was that slum dweller who, while wanting to rise up the social ladder by winning money, is not even educated. তাকে কোনো ফর্মাল শিক্ষাও দেওয়া হয়নি. How does he answer those questions? By in regular days doing a regular and poor chores. That is how he sees India. That is how the director saw India, and that is how he, as a director of Hollywood, backed by so many big producers, that is how he portrayed India to the rest of the world. And the movie goes on to win Oscars, even more famous. Those representations have been immortalized. India as a land of slum dwellers, they have been immortalized. Of course, you will find some good points, but then again, they are both there. So that is how films also become an ideological practice. But it is also possible for us as educated human beings, as educated intellectuals, that we can use this same novel of Kipling, this same film of Slumdog Millionaire, to challenge these representations. I can challenge these representations. How? By pointing them out, by bringing them out, by scrutinizing them, by criticizing them, and by exposing them, by studying them. I cannot just see and know that, see, Kipling is making us seem like a land of snake charmers. No, that is not a challenge. আমি জেনে বুঝে গেলাম তাতে কিছু হবে না. I have to know, learn and prove it. I have to expose these hidden politics that lies behind literary books and literary texts, or any text for that matter. That is how ideology, which is a tool, which is an instrument of power, can also be used to challenge them, can also be used to contest the power. So is this much clear? This is what this slide actually meant, how ideology can be used both by the power and those who are challenging power. I think, is this much clear? কারোর অসুবিধা থাকলে এক্ষুনি বলো, আনমিউট করে, or you want me to repeat? Okay, okay, let's move on. Now we are moving closer to Gramsci. All right, so what you see in front of your screen, this is nothing but a quote from Lenin himself. He talks about literature over here. He says that principle of party literature. Read what is there on your screen. I'm explaining. So instead of what you see in front of you is actually nothing but Lenin saying that instead of seeing authors who are only inspired, inspiration এর জন্য কবিতা লিখছে, কাজ লিখছে, যেগুলো যেরকম ভাবে আমরা একটা Keats, when we read a Shelley or when we read a Keats, we approach their text in that way, that they are inspired writers, inspired poets. Even then Shelley was not without P.B. Shelley was not without any political agenda. He was also paying his respect to his own political thoughts by his poems. Nonetheless, instead of a Marxist critic or a Leninist Marxist critic, instead of seeing authors as independent, inspired individuals whose genius and creative imagination allows them to create original and novel work of art, this Marxist sees them as constantly formed by their social contexts in ways which they themselves would usually not admit. A literary artist will never admit যে আমার কবিতার পেছনে এই একটা political agenda আছে. No, it is up to the reader. শ্রোতাদের ওপর থাকে. It is up to the reader, the viewers, the audience, the critics, the scholars, us. It is up to us to interpret that literature down to that very political agenda which the artist also wants to show, but the artist will never admit. A Marxist knows this. This is not just the content, this is not just what they are writing, but also how they are writing it. So if you are reading W.B. Yeats before 1900s and after 1900s, you will see that it is not just what he is writing about Ireland, but also how he is writing about Ireland. And only then we will know that yes, he was a nationalist, he was patriotic, and all his poems more or less can be referred back to this nationalist cause of Ireland. So no literary artist or art for art's sake does not exist in Marxist criticism. All art is powered by agenda, good or bad, that is a different question, but all art is powered by it. This is how Marxist sees literature. So you will find prominent Marxist critics like Terry Eagleton, who suggests the same, Catherine Belzy, I'm just mentioning names over here, Catherine Belzy, who sees the same. She says, this Belzy woman, she's a Marxist critic, and she writes that if you go back to the 1800s, when realist novel খুব বেশি লেখা হচ্ছিল, like Charles Dickens in the Victorian age, like Tristram Shandy, written by Smollett, like Pamela, like Clarissa, all of these realist novels, they contain very clear and valid proof of the existing social structure. They are about the society of the Victorian age, because realism as a genre, by its very nature, it does not pay any attention to the conventional ways of seeing things intact. Like whatever they see, whatever the realist novelists they saw in front of them, they wrote it, but with an objective. They wrote it the way they saw it, and it was that very fashion, it was this very way of writing literature or writing books in this realistic fashion that gave us or gave readers a very thorough perspective of England during the Victorian age. তো তাহলে তুমি যদি বলো যে আমি যেটা দেখছি সেটাই যদি লিখি, তাহলে সেটাতে কি করে পলিটিক্যাল এজেন্ডা থাকবে? Then that is a very stupid question, because whatever you are seeing in front of you is charged with the social context. সমাজের প্রসঙ্গ ছাড়া কিছুই এক্সিস্ট করে না। নাথিং এক্সিস্টস উইদাউট কনটেক্সট, নাথিং এক্সিস্টস উইদাউট সোশ্যাল কনটেক্সটস। অ্যান্ড হোয়াট ইজ সোসাইটি বাট a machine of politics, a machine of economics, a machine of culture, art, and everything that you know. Society includes everything. So whenever I say that art cannot exist without a social context, I mean exactly this. And this is what here Lenin is also saying. This is a quote by Lenin himself. He's saying literature must become a component of organized, planned, and integrated social democratic party work. So literature must belong to the party. In his case, it was the Leninist Marxist party. Time change হয়ে যাবে, সময় change হয়ে যাবে, there will be a different form of party in rule, there will be a different form of government in rule, and the literature will belong to them. I had provided you with an example of our new school curriculum, school syllabus, how they have been changed in order to affect their own power mechanisms. So this is true for everything. Even those literature that were not written from the Marxist perspective, আমরা তাদেরকেও এই মার্কসিস্ট ক্রিটিসিজমের মধ্যে নিয়ে আসতে পারি। It is very much possible. You can read Plato from a Marxist perspective. You can read Horace from a Marxist perspective. You can read, তোমাদেরকে আমি হার্ডি পড়িয়েছিলাম তো, did I teach you Hardy, Mayor of Castrovich? Was I the one who taught you that? কেউ বলতে পারছো না? Whom did I teach Hardy? I taught you Hardy. I taught you the Mayor of Castrovich, didn't I? Hello, can you hear me? Any which way. So any particular text can be brought into this Marxist perspective, even though it is not, they are not written by Marxists or Marx supporters of this theory. So literature is not without a propaganda. Now this brings us to the fact of vulgar Marxism of 1930s, which is bringing us closer to Gramsci again. See, in the 1920s, during the early years of Russian Revolution, literature and the arts was very enlightened and experimental, and characteristically modern forms of art were being encouraged. They were encouraged by the social power. The 1930s, that is the year that you can see on your screen, it saw a reaction throughout the whole of Soviet society, that is the Russian society, and the state began to exert or to push direct control over literature and the arts as well as everything else. And at the first Soviet Writers' Congress, that was a Writers' Congress or a meeting of the writers of the Soviet Russia, liberal views were outlawed. Liberal views, as in views that do not belong or views that are not similar to that of Lenin, they were completely outlawed, made illegal, and a new orthodoxy was imposed based on the writings of Lenin rather than Marx and Engels. So Marx and Engels থেকে attentionটা সরে গেল. Now attention comes on Lenin, who was imposing strict laws on the literature that was being produced, because the literature had to serve the purpose of his own party. Even Joyce's Ulysses was outlawed. And this brings us to the This makes this particular rule or practice by Lenin, this made a split, this brought a split into the Marxist theory, making one part the traditional Marxist or Engels theory and the other part a Leninist Marxist theory. Thus was formed the vulgar Marxism of 1930s. It was a direct cause-effect relationship between literature and economics. Economics affected literature, and the literature that was produced during the time should be affecting economy positively. All other kinds of literature were made illegal, they were outlawed. And a much cited, a very good example would be Illusion and Reality. It is a book written in the 1930s, Illusion and Reality, where writing is very generalized in the sense that there is little detailed textual reference to the works under discussion, very specific in the sense that every facet of a writer is linked to some aspect of her or his social status. So in this book, literature as a general production of art, literature as universal, literature as humanist, in this book we will find no such aspects. Rather, all writers, all literature are given social context so that they become important only in the context of the society at that point of time, the society which was ruled by Lenin, who controlled the laws, and it was according to him literature that literature was published. If it did not meet his views, if it did not meet his party views, the literature was banned, it was outlawed, it was made illegal. And this is what he says, that does a particular kind of vocabulary in direct is the direct product of the middle class writers' evasiveness on sensitive social issues. So these literary writers, they were escaping or they were moving away from talking about real social issues. And this is what is termed as the vulgar Marxism of the 1930s, where K.M. Newton says that it was as if all poets have their own form of escape from modern reality. Tennyson lapses into the dream world of Keats, and Browning writes constantly on Italian medieval themes. So nothing is without always Browning and Tennyson and Keats, they can only become important if they were writing about the social reality, if they were writing about the society at that point of time. And since K.M. Newton, these Marxists, the vulgar Marxists, they never found anything of social importance in the works of these writers' work. They thought that they were all escapists. And so K.M. Newton writes that to Tennyson, the Keatsian world of romance, to Browning, the Italian springtime, both are revolting backwards. They are trying to escape from the contradiction of the class for whom they speak. So these were the perspectives of vulgar Marxism. Thomas Browning, what is it, name of the poem? I'm forgetting it. I think it is Fra Lippo-Lippi. Yes, Browning has a poem called Fra Lippo-Lippi. You will see that in that there is a painter who is painting in his own style, which was different from the classical painting style of that point of time. And he was being questioned and constantly questioned and asked to remove his paintings by the church, because they were supporting the classical style of painting and not how Fra Lippo-Lippi was painting. Fra Lippo-Lippi was painting actually realistic pictures. So the church said that how can you be so realistic about God and angels? No, they have to be perfect, they have to be ideal, they have to look like human beings yet be different from them, because they cannot be like human beings. Otherwise, what makes them angelic? Otherwise, what makes them divine? So this Fra Lippo-Lippi was being constantly questioned. So today, if you are reading that poem from a Marxist perspective, you will say that Fra Lippo-Lippi was running away from his social conditions. You will not talk about painting, you will not talk about classical literature, you will not talk about Victorian literature, but only this, how Fra Lippo was escaping from his class restrictions. So as I had also mentioned before, that for Marxism, all history is a history of class relations. Up to this, is it clear? Anyone wants me to repeat anything? All right. So I am continuing. Now we have to, today we will read quite a definitions amra porbo. We will understand a very very important and very interesting concepts that Marxists or Marxist theory has for us, and with this we will begin our particular study of Gramsci. But before that, one other very extremely important person whose ideas have influenced Marxism to a great degree, and that is Louis Althusser. Louis Althusser is a French Marxist theoretician. We are reading him because much recent Marxist thinking on literature has been influenced by his work, by this French Marxist theoretician Althusser's work. The first term, the first idea or the first concept he gives is the notion of over-determinism. Over-determinism, শব্দটা অনেক বড়, but it's actually very easy. It is an effect. Over-determinism is an effect, is a consequence, is a result which arises from a variety of causes. That is, from several causes acting together rather than from a single factor. So over-determinism is a system whereby a particular effect can never be related to a single cause. There is no causa sui. We call, in Latin it is called causa sui, S-U-I. One cause for an effect. But Althusser said that it is not possible for us living in a society, living in the modern society, to think like that. I cannot relate a single effect to a single cause. There are so many multiple causes. So if you remember what I had taught you in the last class, let me just go back to that slide. Just one moment. Oh. Yes, this was the slide that we had seen or learned in the previous class. It was the base and the superstructure. So if you think about over-determinism here, you will understand it better, because I had said that economic determinism is how the cultural world is affected by the material means of production. So this material means of production, what is this? Is this one particular cause? Is it only one factory, or is it only one accident, or is it only one law that affects our lives, that affects our society? No, it is a multiple, it is a reason of multiple factors. Power, in order to continue itself, in order to maintain itself, in order to make itself more and more powerful all the time, it has to rely on several hundreds of factors. It is not just one man who carries a party. There are hundreds of people associated to a political party, and they have their various roles to play, which have their various consequences, giving rise to one particular effect, which is of democracy, which is of monarchy, which is of domination, of submission, of whatever you want to say. So you cannot say that it is only one cause or one political party that has made our Indian society the way it is. I cannot say that today India's condition is like this because of the current political party. That would be an outright lie, because there have been parties or powers before the current political party. There have been other kinds of governments. There have been political parties of different ideologies who have come to power, and they have contributed to the making of Indian society. Whatever it is, bad or good, again a different question. But they have contributed to the Indian society as we know now. So over-determinism, as we saw in the case of Althusser, it is this exactly this, that there are several causes that give rise to a single effect. This concept again can be linked and this concept of linked and interacting or interdependent causes is meant to highlight or is meant to give importance to the fact that simplistic notions, that if we think very simply and say that the base affects the superstructure in only one single way, then we will be wrong. The base affects the superstructure, that is power by owning material means of production. It affects our culture in multifarious ways. It affects our cultures from the smallest point to the biggest point. It affects people who live in villages and districts that you cannot even point out on the world map. It affects cultures that are cultures of societies, cultures of places that are so big that you never thought that they could be affected. It affects the sector of education, it affects the sector of industries, it affects the sector of visual culture, films and media. It affects all kinds of pillars that build up a society. তোমরা যদি আজকে the telegrapher first পেজটা পড়ো, you will understand what I am talking about this over-determinism. Over-determinism can work both ways. If I approach over-determinism and say that these are the 1,000 factors of power caused by power that has affected me thus, I can also say that over-determinism is also when power uses so many kinds of forces, so many kinds and ways of forces in order to perpetuate or in order to maintain itself. So you read the first page of the Telegraph today and you will see what I am talking about, what this over-determinism actually is. Now a related term is this relative autonomy that you can see, which is the view that in spite of the connections between culture and economics, art has a degree of independence. Art has a certain degree of independence. Now this is also a very big truth that we learn. We will find opposing views while reading Marxist theory. I can say that art is a propaganda. I can say that art is created according to specific and subjective agendas of power. But this is also true that art does enjoy a certain degree of independence. Art can be written only for the sake of pleasure. Art can be produced only for the sake of instructing, only for the sake of pleasure, or only because it needs to exist. You read some modern poetry and I can challenge you 200% that you will not find, যতবারই পড়ো না কেন, you will not find any meaning from it. Modern poetry existed. Modern poetry was actually constructed with the principle, with keeping in mind that the poems should not reach a meaning immediately. And since it does not reach meaning immediately, we can never put a finger on what it wants to achieve. And when we cannot do that, we authenticate, we validate that particular poetry or that particular piece of art as an independent production of art without any political agenda. So if you read, if you have seen PK, or PK bhule jao, better movie, if you have seen Munna Bhai MBBS, that is a perfect example of how art can exist, and a perfect example of very fine filmmaking, because in that movie, even though it challenged the entire sector of entire medicinal sector that is involved with so much of corruption, which you can find in news. Of course, it is a required part of the society. You will find that they are criticizing in that movie. Munna Bhai MBBS criticizes this sector of medicine, of the sector of medical or hospitals, this chain of hospitals. But comically, through comedy, so that no one can say that, see, this movie is a challenge to our doctors, capitalized doctors, doctors who charge 1200 to 1500 to 2000 rupees from a patient and do not even pay 2 minutes of attention to them. These kind of doctors exist. Mostly these are the doctors that exist. We have general hospitals, we have specialist hospitals, we have multi-specialist hospitals, super specialist hospitals. So where will you go to as a citizen? Not even uneducated, even an educated citizen will be confused that what are these for. But these sections exist in order to increase profits for this sector of medicine. And Munnabai MBBS exposed that, it challenged that, it criticized that, but via comedy, so that no one can point out that this is the objective of this film. So art does invite, or art does have a certain degree of independence, and that is what is called relative autonomy. Next, we come to this very important term called ideology. Again, I would remind you to write down any queries or any problems that, or any questions that you want to ask. Please write it down and keep it reserved for our discussion session that we will have. Now, ideology is a very important term for Althusser and for all Marxists. Even for Gramsci, ideology is very, very important. It is a broad concept, variously defined in Marxism. I have just given one particular definition. So what is this system of representations that you saw? Representations, I already gave you an example what representations are, how these systems of representation they constrain and restrain us into certain identities which you and I presently do not even have the choice to change, because the representations have been immortalized by language and by literature. You cannot change them. You can add meaning to them, and that is what the work of theory is. Any theory, you add meanings. You do not change meanings. We can never do that as literary scholars, but as responsible literary scholars, we can add newer and newer meanings to already existing literature. So this system of representations, I gave you an example. And ideology is when this system of representation is at the heart of a given society. To give a concise definition which makes culture, including literature, this is a crucial vehicle of the values which give importance to the class relations in any society. Power maintains its superior class by creating this system of representations which never dies. And the fact that we are fixated into class roles that have been given to us by people who have dominated over us, who have ruled over us, the fact that we cannot move away from this identity that they have given us, is what ideology works. That is how ideology works. Ideology works to control us. It works to repress, to dominate us. These values and assumptions, they are usually very implicit, they are clearly defined, often unrecognized, but they come together to make the culture of any given time. So during Rudyard Kipling's time, there were many books. He created a culture of these of writing about Indian society from the Western perspective. You do a quick Wikipedia search and you will see there are a number of books very similar to what Rudyard Kipling had written, that invented a culture of that time. That was the culture of that particular time. And next we have the term of decentering. Decentering is a key term again, and it indicates structures which have no essence or focus or center. The decentering is again related, you can see decentering is again related to over-determinism. Since we cannot say that there is one single cause for any effect in this world or any effect in this society, we can also not say that there is a center controlling all these effects. Now that is what we want to do when we are approaching any literature from a Marxist perspective, we want to decenter, we want to shift power from its power in the center and say that there is no center at all. There is no one single cause. This is partly a way of avoiding the view that the economic base, as I said, that the base creates or completely controls the superstructure. That is not the case. There is not only one factor that controls the society. There are multiple of them, and therefore it is not just power at the center. So it is not just one man again who controls the society, who controls the country, but there are several men, there are ideas of several men, there are ways and opinions of several men that influence, that make decision making possible, the decisions which affect the entire country. So there is no one single center, there is no one single meaning. We have to break these boundaries, we have to break this system of representation which makes us rigid, which gives us a single definition, a single identity, which we do not have, which we did not have a choice in making. আমি নিজের আইডেন্টিটি নিয়ে যখন কথা বলবো, আমার নিশ্চয়ই ওখানে একটা চয়েস থাকবে, that this is the identity I have chosen. But in the system of representation, that choice is taken away. The identity is given to you by power. In the case of that novel Kim, that choice is taken away by Rudyard Kipling. He is the center over there, he is the center from where all meanings are being generated. Now we need to decenter him, we need to move away from that special source of power, and we need to say that there are other factors as well that have affected my identity, that have affected my role in the society. And that is how Marxist theories work. Now the last thing that you see, again very important, this is very simple: state power and state control. It is about how a political party controls the society. It is either by repressive state apparatuses or ideological state apparatuses. Very simply put, repressive state apparatuses, or RSA, they are the use of power and force. মানে নকশালবাড়ি আন্দোলন হচ্ছে, ঠিক আছে, মার্ক্সবাদীরা, কমিউনিস্টরা বিপ্লব করছে, রেভলিউশনস করছে, রিবেলিয়ন্স আসছে, যাদবপুর ইউনিভার্সিটিতে হচ্ছে, জওয়াহরলাল নেহেরু ইউনিভার্সিটিতে হচ্ছে, আলিগড় মুসলিম ইউনিভার্সিটিতে হচ্ছে। সরকার বা ক্ষমতা তাদেরকে থামাতে পারছে না, কন্ট্রোল করতে পারছে না। কি করবে? পুলিশ পাঠাচ্ছে, আর্মি পাঠাচ্ছে, ব্যারিকেডস পাঠাচ্ছে, টিয়ার গ্যাস এমপ্লয় করছে, শটস ফায়ার করছে, ইমপ্রিজনমেন্ট হচ্ছে উইদাউট ট্রায়ালস, জেলে পাঠিয়ে দিচ্ছে। মানে পাওয়ার ইউজিং ফোর্স, arms, in order to repress us, coerce us, in order to control the society. Controlling of the society by force, that is RSA for you. And on the other hand, সরকার যে চেষ্টা করছে যাতে ইন্টেলেকচুয়ালস আর স্কুল থেকে কোনোদিন তৈরি না হোক, যাতে স্কুল থেকেই ওয়ার্কিং ক্লাস পপুলেশন তৈরি হয়ে যাক। ক্লাস 6 থেকে স্কিল ওয়ার্ক ইনক্লুড করে দেওয়া হয়েছে স্কুল সিলেবাসে, ক্লাস 6 থেকে, which is against the child labor policy. Child labor policy says that children below 14 years of age cannot be forced to work. So why are they being taught skills or vocational training from class 6? Because power wants to produce an entire new class of working class people. ঠিক আছে? So this is controlling by ideology. This is controlling by using forces that are not tangible or concrete. We cannot touch them, we cannot see them. It controls our mind. It বাচ্চাবেলা থেকেই কন্ট্রোল করতে শুরু করে দেওয়া, so that when they grow up they become exactly the way that power wants them to be. Not highly educated intellectuals, but workers who will work in factories and increase revenue for the capitalist government that we have. This is known as the ideological state apparatus, or in short ISA. Alright, just give me one moment and I will be back. Just 1 minute. Take a break for 1 minute, people. Huh? Just 1 moment. এটা কি হলো? All right. Okay, so ISA and RSA, we are done. Now we are moving to our hero, the protagonist of this assignment, and that is Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci. Now this, what we read just before this, in the what we saw in the slide just before this ISA and RSA, the fact that there is a distinction between the way power controls or maintains itself, distinction between the use of force, and distinction between the use of force and ideology. This distinction is very closely related to what Antonio Gramsci calls hegemony. Gramsci contrasts rule, rajotto. Rajotto mane, of course, do not consider it as a monarchy. By rule, I mean it can be whatever, গণতান্ত্রিক রাজত্ব হতে পারে, মানে monarchic rule হতে পারে, whatever it is always a rule. It is a kind of rule. It may be political, it may be monarchical, it may be social rule, etc., etc. But Gramsci contrasts this rule, which is direct political control, which uses force when necessary, and hegemony, which is the whole lived social process as practically organized by specific and dominant meanings, values and beliefs of a kind which can be abstracted as a worldview or a class outlook. So simply put, RSA for Althusser, that is use of forces, repression, is rule for Gramsci, when the political party uses force to control the society. And ISA for Althusser, that is the use of ideological forces, is hegemony for Gramsci. Hegemony ke khub, this funny sounding word, hegemony ke khub confusingly ba khub simply bhabe power হিসেবে বলা যায়. Hegemony is often used synonymously to power, but for Gramsci this is not the case. Gramsciর জন্য এটা completely different. Hegemony is this whole set of lived social processes which is nothing but ideology, which produces values and beliefs of whom? Of power, of whatever political party is at power, which for Gramsci is a communist party. Gramsci was a communist, so of course, so Gramsciর জন্য communist party is at the rule, and it uses ideology to control or to maintain its worldview of class relations. So hegemony is not a negative term for Gramsci, because if hegemony is the use of ideology by power to maintain itself, then we must also remember that power for Gramsci is a communist party. And since Gramsci is talking for communism, then hegemony for Gramsci is a positive term, whereas rule or the RSA of Althusser is a negative term. So Gramsci একটু খুব middle পড়ে. আজকে অবধি, মানে এতদিন অবধি what we read was how power controls society in order to maintain a class relation. Of course, from Marxist point of view, how power maintain itself to perpetuate a class relation uses force or ideology. Bad things, right? These are all bad things. These are the things that we do not want. But Gramsci wants a kind of power to prevail, the communist power, which should use ideology rather than force or coercion or arms or bullets, etc., etc., etc. Gramsci says that his communist party should have this control over ideology so that it can maintain class relations in the society. That is what hegemony is for Gramsci. So Gramsci wants his political party to succeed by using ideology. তো এবার তোমরা জিজ্ঞেস করবে কিন্তু ম্যাম আমরা তো ইডিওলজি পড়লাম এত খারাপ জিনিসপত্র হ্যান ত্যান। But you have to understand that Gramsci is a sympathizer with his communist party and he is talking from his perspective, the perspective of the political party at rule. So he will never say that ideology is bad because he is working for power as well. He wants to maintain power as well. But at the same point of time, ideology for Gramsci is not the controlling of the mind. Ideology for Gramsci are positive forces, ways in which a communist party should ethically maintain itself. এই কনফিউশনটা আমরা এসেটা শুরু করলে চলে যাবে। So this is and another important thing is that hegemony then I'm not finished. Hegemony then becomes an internalized form, a form that you make your own, internalized form of social control. That is, the society accepts this ideological rule. Gramsci says that the society should, or it does accept this ideological rule because it internalizes or naturalizes this kind of rule. It makes natural communist party এরকম ভাবেই ideology ব্যবহার করবে যাতে খুব স্বাভাবিক হয়ে যায়। This ideological rule becomes very natural for the society to accept. Therefore, hegemony becomes this internalized form of social control, which makes certain views obviously of the political party seem very natural and so invisible, so very natural that they hardly seem like views at all. They become a way of life, they become a way of everyday living, it becomes a way of the world. Now this is the trick whereby we are made to feel that we are choosing, but that is not the case. তুমি বলবে যে আমরা তো ডেমোক্রেটিক কান্ট্রিতে থাকি। Democracy is a farce, you must know this. We actually do not choose our leaders. I am sorry if I am repeating myself, but then again this is worth repeating that whichever political party is in control, যাই হোক না কেন, তুমি ইতিহাস মানে স্বাধীনতার ইতিহাস থেকে শুরু করো, whichever political party has been in power since the advent of democracy, তুমি বলবে যে we have chosen our own leaders, but no. The political parties, they fight with themselves and they reach a majority. Then it is them who decides who will stand for which district. It is them who decides which of their men will be the best in controlling this area according to our own views. আমি যদি আজকে চাই যে আমি বেহালা ঠাকুরপুকুরের একটা এনজিও ওয়ার্কার যে চাইল্ড ট্রাফিকিং, ফুড অ্যাডাল্টারেশন, এইসব কথা নিয়ে সামাজিক বিরোধিতা করে, এসব কথাবার্তা নিয়ে চর্চা করে, লোকদেরকে এডুকেট করে, মেক পিপল অ্যাওয়্যার, আমি যদি চাই যে সে আজকে আমার কাউন্সিলর হোক, সে আজকে আমার এমএলএ হোক, আমি কি সেটা করতে পারবো? So do I really have a choice? No. The choice is always filtered. It always goes through variety of factors, as I had said about over determinism, and then it reaches us. So 100 কোটি লোকের মধ্যে থেকে তোমাকে 3 জন দেওয়া হবে বা 2 জন দেওয়া হবে বা 1 জন দেওয়া হবে যাকে তোমায় চুজ করতেই হবে, because that is what democracy is. You elect your own representatives, but these representatives are none other than those who are chosen by power. সবসময় খারাপ হতে হবে, I am not saying that, I am not talking completely negatively, but this is the way it generally works, and this is the trick by which power maintains and perpetuates and controls the society. And this is what is called interpellation. This term interpellation is of Althusser, not of Gramsci's, but Gramsci will be using this term. So Althusser says that this is interpellation in which we are made to think that we are choosing, but we are actually choosing zero. So this is it. I will keep it till here for today. I wanted to read the introductory part of the essay today, but of course again I could not. So ঠিক আছে, আমরা এসেটা দিয়ে directly we will begin from the next day. It is my request that you read at least a few pages, 2 to 3 pages, so that it's easier for you to follow. Keep it read for the next class, and we will of course continue from there.